On behalf of the committee, let me express our appreciation for your presence here today. My name is Arrmanatha Nasir. I'm the Vice Chair of the committee and the permanent representative of Indonesia to the UN. I will be moderating this event today. Since its creation in 1975, the committee has worked to promote the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including the rights to self-determination as provided by international law and enshrined in the UN Charter. Our mandate is regularly renewed by the General Assembly. The committee's activities on the question of Palestine aims at mobilizing efforts to end the Israeli occupation and at achieving the realization of the two-state solution and a sustainable and just peace. As per its mandate, the committee raises awareness internationally on the question of Palestine and the challenges faced daily by the Palestinian population. In doing so, we engage with civil society in the occupied Palestinian territory, Israel, and elsewhere. Today's event will focus on Al-Khalil, Hebron, as a case study illustrating the Israeli illegal settlement of the West Bank and the specific challenges faced by the Palestinians living near such a settlement in Hebron, in the southern part of the West Bank. Israel exercised direct control over the 20% of the Hebron city known as H2. This is home to some 33,000 Palestinian and a few hundred Israeli settlers living in a fortified enclave protected by Israel's military. This situation remains volatile and reverberates politically, economically, and socially in the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. This is the focus of today's discussion. So let me welcome today's panelists. We have 4 panelists today. First is Mr. Hisham Sharabati. Welcome. He is a Palestinian human rights defender based in Hebron. He is a co-founder and coordinator of the Hebron Defense Committee, a non-violent resistance group that works against the occupation in the city of Hebron. Currently, he is a field worker for the Palestinian Human Rights Organization, Al-Haq. Our second panelist will be Ms. Inès Abdel Razek. She is the Advocacy Director of the Palestinian Institute for Public Diplomacy and its digital platform. Ms. Rabat is an independent Palestinian organization focusing on international mobilization and digital campaigning. She is also an advisory board member of the enterprise Build Palestine and a policy member of Al-Shabaka, Palestinian Policy Network. Our third panelist is Mr. Sulaiman Khatib. Welcome. He is the Director of International Relations for Combatants for Peace, a non-profit Israeli and Palestinian peace-building organization. Mr. Khatib was the founder and general director of Al-Quds, Association for Democracy and Dialogue. Our fourth panelist is Mr. Avner Wishnitzer. He is also at the Combatant for Peace as co-founder and member. He was a soldier in an elite commando unit of the Israeli army until he publicly refused to serve in the OPT in late 2004. He has led several initiatives in Area C in the OPT, including the opening of Palestinian access to water campaign in the south of Hebron Hills. The theme of today's event, Al-Khalil Hebron, a case study for the impact of Israeli settlement on Palestinian rights under occupation, is of utmost importance and not often enough discussed in public event. Over several years now, the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the Secretary General have reaffirmed that all settlements are illegal under international law. It also constitutes a substantial obstacle to peace, calling on Israel, the occupying power, to cease all settlement activities immediately and completely. The committee has repeatedly expressed its concern at the continuation of settlements activities and called for the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2334/2016 and all other relevant UN resolutions. In this context, the situation in Hebron stands out for the well-documented and repeated incidents of of settlers' violence, by the heavy military presence in this Palestinian urban area, and by the impact of closures of thousands of Palestinians segregated from the rest of the population, by an extensive network of gates, walls, and fences, and a heavy Israeli military presence enforcing this segregation. So let us therefore start our panel discussion. I will give the floor to each of the panelists for a short briefing for their respective topics and areas. After this intervention, I will open the floor for comments by the committee members and observers, followed by question and discussion from the audience. In total, we'll try to wrap this meeting, this conference, this seminar by 12 o'clock. While participation in the virtual platform is limited to UN members and observer states, as well as the panelists, the general public can watch the event on UN TV and send their questions via the committee page, Facebook page, Twitter account, and emails. The emails would be dprmeeting@un.org, or you can also send it through WhatsApp, which is +1 646 421 0579. We encourage participants to tweet using the hashtag #Rights4Palestine. Firstly, let me give the floor to Minister Riyad Mansour, the permanent observers of the Observer State of the Palestine to the United Nations. Minister Mansour, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nasir, for giving me the floor. And also, I want to thank you, to thank my colleagues, members of the Bureau and members of the committee for organizing this very important event as an event and series of events organized by the committee, highlighting the different aspects of the life of the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory. Also, I want to thank the division for facilitating all the necessary things for making this conference, this event, as a possible. Allow me also to welcome the 4 panelists, and we are eager to listen to their experiences and to their ideas, as not only talking about the illegal settlements campaign, but we are concentrating to a great extent on the application of these legal settlements in the area around Al-Khalil people. We are grateful for their presence with us. We are eager to listen to what they have to say. I am sure that the entire audience, diplomats and in all corners of the globe, will benefit from what they have to share with us. We are grateful to them in this regard. I wish, this seminar, this conference, this event, success, and I'm sure it will be the case under, your able, chairmanship. And also I want to express our gratitude to Ambassador Niang, the chairman of the committee, the ambassador of Senegal to the United Nations. Thank you very much, Ambassador Nasir, and we wish you all the best in your contribution, presentation, and in handling the questions and the comments from the general audience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister Mansour, for your confidence in the committee and in our team. So let me start today panel discussion. Like I said earlier, we have 4 panelists, and I think we have a total of 1 hour for the 4 panelists. Our first panelist today will be Mr. Hisham Sharabati. Will be presenting us the impact of military closures for the Palestinians in H2. Mr. Sharabati, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for everyone who is attending this session. And I hope that this will highlight the issue of Hebron and put it more on the table of the UN. But will you, Chairman, please give me the ability to share, as I have a presentation that I prepared to share here, and I don't have the bottom share active. You know, you control it.
Yes, can I ask the technician to allow Mr. Sharabati to have the ability to share slides?
I will start talking anyway till the ability to share. We the Palestinians actually consider the center of Hebron as a microcosm to the occupation. And we say that in a small geographic area, we have nearly all forms of the the oppression policies of the occupation. As it is mentioned, and I think maybe almost everyone knows in this panel, Hebron is located to the south of the West Bank. Can everyone see the map now? Okay, so yeah, to the right we have the map of historic Palestine. Hebron is located to the south of Jerusalem, and it is located to the south of the West Bank. The bigger map is the municipal boundaries of Hebron. H2 area is the Israeli-controlled part of the city. This was part of the deal, part of the Oslo Accords. The agreement was signed in September 95, implemented in January 97, as the Israelis has continued putting restrictions and conditions on unjust agreement that has been imposed on the Palestinians, but they also tried to postpone the, implementing it as much as long as they can. In Hebron, H1 Palestinian controlled part of the city, H2 Israeli controlled part of the city, and within Hebron today we have 8 colonial enclaves that are located in the center of the city. Each of these, some of them are only one building, others contain 2 or 3 buildings next to each other. Everything in between is Palestinian. Also, this is the map of the controlled area, and also part of H2 is a restricted area, the area with the lines. It's good to look at the lines that are colored, the yellow, red, and the blue, and the brown. The blue are the settler enclaves in Hebron. Actually, it's part of them. Now, every colored street is a street where Palestinians cannot drive on it. And that is roughly the streets connecting between the settler enclaves in Hebron and the settlement of Kiryat Arba to the east of the city. The red ones, we have roughly 12 kilometers of roads where Palestinians cannot drive on them. Part of that, nearly 1.5 kilometers where Palestinians are not even allowed to walk. The red lines are the area where Palestinians are not allowed to walk at all. These are some pictures of settler enclaves in the city. This is ancient Palestinian homes that the settlers has broken into, claiming their ownership to them and staying there and given military protection. This one is a non-residency building, for example. Now they are building to the top of it. This one is disputed in the Israeli court. But despite this fact, the settlers has broken into, although there is an Israeli court order that says they should not be there. Another big one. Now, we have in Hebron a restricted area that have nearly 65 roads that are totally blocked, roads or alleys. This is part of the forms. This is like cement panels put to the top of each other with a barbed wire to the top. Other bricks, and here we see a blocked street as it become like a dead point. The settlers' children have turned the street into a playground, a football playground, as Palestinians are not allowed to access. The house to the left is a Palestinian house, and Palestinians, to get to their home, they need to have a very long detour. Another form of the closure, the barbed wire is fixed on metal bars and so on. And these are mobile parts, restrictions of movement that are used, imposing a closure, imposing curfew, restricting movement into the market, and so on. This is a very visible marked street where one side is assigned for the Palestinians, one side is assigned for the Israeli colonial settlers. This has been working in Hebron for like 10 years, but then has been moved by the Israelis because it was almost everyone that visits the old city will see it, a very clear sign of racism. So they dismantled it, gradually moved it to another area with a worse version, actually. Another street in Hebron also, the boy to the right is a Palestinian boy hiding from the Israeli soldiers. Now, in addition to 60 roads that are completely locked, we have like 25 roads that have checkpoints on them. These checkpoints are, it is like, it is a belt system where we have turnstile gates, then metal detector gates, then turnstile gate. After it, all are supplied with surveillance cameras. Part of them are having the ability of facial recognition and the smart cameras that violates the privacy of the residents. This is another form of a checkpoint to the same street, actually. This one is north entrance to Shuhada Street. This one is south entrance to Shuhada Street, which is a very important street in Hebron, connecting the northern central neighborhoods of Hebron with the southern neighborhoods of Hebron. The total length of Shuhada Street is nearly 1,300 meters. As it is closed, Palestinians to drive between the two ends, they have to drive like 6-7 kilometers. And of course, because of the total closure, we have Palestinians that want to drive from a certain area in the northeast of Hebron to the southeast of Hebron. They have to drive like 17 kilometers. The Israelis try the same checkpoint, actually. This checkpoint, this is the same one. They try to decorate it from the inside because the inside were the Jewish visitors and so on. The sign says, "Welcome to Abu Rish crossing." And the Abu Rish is a Palestinian neighborhood. And actually the checkpoint is separating the same neighborhood, like part of the residents of the neighborhood live inside the checkpoint, other part live out of the checkpoint. This is something that you don't see, a barrier between some countries and other countries, while you have it in the same city and the same neighborhood. Within the restricted area, we have also other restrictions, even inside it. Like this is, these stairs lead up to a Palestinian primary school, and the only ones allowed through, for example, in this area are the teachers and the littlest children of the school, who have to go every morning in front of an Israeli checkpoint. The soldiers check the team of the school, and they have a list of names. Of course, the Israelis tried to impose a system of permits, that they wanted the Palestinians to carry permits to move in, but the Palestinians refused to this policy, saying that we don't need to have permits to go to our destinations. And then the Israelis made their own lists by checking everyone who teaches there, checking their IDs, then leaving a list of names on the checkpoint. This is also another restriction within the restricted area. If you look at the gate, to the top of it, I am pointing with the cursor. There is a small device actually here. This does not exist anymore, but it was used for some time. The device peeps every moment somebody goes through the gate, actually. And there is a very close checkpoint, so it beeps, so it takes the soldiers' attention to see who is going on. The gate it's called Sulaiman neighborhood, and Sulaiman neighborhood gate, now they have a different gate, but it is closed every night, for example, late at night, and it is reopened within the morning. Palestinians in the streets, that if you live in a street where you don't have access to your house walking, you cannot drive to your house, how you get there? Simply, the great majority of the residents has left, has been cleansed from the area. Very few who remain, they access their homes through the roofs, the rooftop, as it is the old city where homes are connected. So they will go one roof to another, and then they get to somebody's house that have a back entrance. And for example, here people are developing their mechanisms, like adding these metal ladders or stairs, to go one roof to another and to access their homes that they remained in. In this, this one, driving between this green point here and this green point here, actually it is less than 1 kilometer. And this is, as it is a restricted area, we have a checkpoint right here, we have a checkpoint right here, we have a checkpoint right here. So the alternative is driving the yellow route. And this is, as I said, this is the central of the city, and it is much worse to the east of the city. Within Hebron, we have 520 Palestinian commercial stores that are closed by military orders since late 2003. Of course, it was closed in the year 2000 in the heat of what we call the second intifada. But in 2003, curfew was lifted, as H2 area remained under curfew during that time. So when curfew was lifted, none of these stores has been allowed to open. 520 of these stores actually are located within the restricted area. Most of them are within the area where Palestinians are not even allowed to walk. And then we have another 1,100 shops that are closed because of lack of business. And lack of business is due to restrictions of the Israelis, harassments by the Israeli soldiers, attacks by Israeli settlers, and so on. And that made less people come to the area. So it forced other shop owners to close. This is a street where Palestinians are not allowed to open at all. Palestinians are not allowed to walk even in this area. So we don't have any shop that is opened. In this picture, we see few shops that are opened, for example, but the great majority are closed, and that's because of lack of business. And here we see Israeli soldiers patrolling in the area who stop mainly the young people coming to the area and harass them. Another picture, these are actually soldiers 4 years ago surrounding a Palestinian primary school while they were commemorating, the death of the late President Palestinian Yasser Arafat. So they were sending hundreds of soldiers surrounding the school just to horrify the children. This is a picture for how it used to be part of the market within H2 area. This is a retailer's market, and now Palestinians in the lower part of the picture, Palestinians are even not allowed to walk there. The settlers use it as parking. The fronts of the shops have graffitis in Hebrew. This one specifically says Nikama, which is revenge. Another one for how it used to be and how it is now. Settlers attack against Palestinians within the presence of Israeli soldiers. An Israeli settler throwing wine on a Palestinian religious woman, harassing the young people coming to the area to do shopping, visit the mosque or whatever. And within the restricted area, we have the Tomb of the Patriarchs, the Ibrahimi Mosque in Al-Khalil, the very holy site in the city. It is required to pass 2 checkpoints to get into it at least. And for some people, they need to pass 4 checkpoints to get there. This reflects the mentality of the colonial settlers we have in Hebron. The settlers has left this graffiti in the wall of a Palestinian girls' school, very clear, gas the Arabs, and the signature JDL, Jewish Defense Leagues. Nonviolence resistance is also targeted by the Israeli occupation, who claim fighting terrorism all the time. If you resist, if a settler claimed that you did something against him, you may face arrest, whether you are a woman, a child, or a young man. So that's in brief, and I hope I did not exceed my time. and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have later.
Thank you, Mr. Sharabati. Your timing is impeccable, very good, very perfect. Thank you for describing to us the restriction imposed on the Palestinian in their own land, their own community, their own house. It highlights the difficulty, the challenges that they face in just undergoing their daily lives, their daily economic lives. And the picture that you have shown is very vivid. And to a certain extent, it can be said that the Palestinians in Hebron are being imprisoned in their own land. So let me now turn to our second panelist. It is Ms. Inès Abdel Razek. She will discuss recent plans, policies, and settlement expansions. Ms. Abdel Razek, you have the floor.
Very much, Ambassador Nasir. Thank you very much for the invitation, and good to see Ambassador Mansour, Ambassador Abdel Hadi, and everyone here. I was asked to come here, to show one of the tools that we have created, and I will explain why we have created it. Hebron is a microcosm not only of occupation but of apartheid and the apartheid system that Israel has maintained over Palestinians since 1948. And I think part of the risk and part of the why also we're talking in front of you today is that a lot of these explanations, I think a lot of these words that you hear a lot in letters, that you hear in the General Assembly, in meetings, sometimes can feel a bit abstract. So I'm glad Mr. Sharabati was here to also remind you what the reality is, I think, for millions of people who live under occupation and under apartheid, behind these words that you constantly hear, settlements, occupied, apartheid. I think we always have to remind that there is a human reality behind it. And one thing is that there is a lot of restrictions for internationals. Obviously, Palestinian refugees are completely banned from returning to their homeland, but also for internationals to witness and to come, there are further restrictions. Actually, Israel has just adopted further rules to restrict even more the visits of foreigners to the West Bank, including students, teachers. They want to exert further control, and this is also part of the apartheid policy, like exert control over our information, our life, our whereabouts, and what we can do or not do. And so for that reason, a couple of years ago, that was actually just before COVID, we created this tool called Palestine VR, so virtual reality. I will show you by sharing, if you can allow me to share, please, my screen. The idea behind that is really to, because a lot of people are not able to travel here, to be able to show in different tours, guided tours, videos in 360 how the reality is on the ground. So the videos will not really work here very well with that platform. So what I will do is just show you briefly how it can look on YouTube, and you can then go yourself and explore by yourself Hebron. We have done a virtual tour of Hebron with Youth Against Settlements and also Breaking the Silence. And so here we have Muhannad, who's actually in the checkpoints that Mr. Sharabati was just showing in between the northern and the southern part of the city. So it's just to have a glimpse that you can basically explore in a 360 way, like all this area that they're guiding you through, to be able to kind of show, and see a bit more the reality. So there is also Shahada Street and the old souk, and I really encourage you to they're very short, so it won't take you, more than 10-15 minutes to go all over them. And we feel it's important because, again, I think a lot of the times it's lost, I think, the human aspect of what we're living, and I think it's very important to remind us all of that. I think the thing that I wanted to really insist on is that Hebron is part of a wider, and I was also asked to kind of give the bigger picture, is, Hebron is the microcosm of what is happening all over Palestine. So part of the apartheid regime, that has not only been now analyzed in very extensive details by an Amnesty report, also by Human Rights Watch, and actually by lots of Palestinian human rights organizations that have also submitted, several submissions to the Convention to End All Forms of Racism, is part in, is basically a system where the fragmentation and the segregation that we're seeing in Hebron is the point all over the territory. So, this system of domination is not only, segregation and existing control and segregation under military occupation. It's also, I think, a deliberate, it's a deliberate attempt to maintain that domination of the Jewish people over the Palestinian people. And it's happening, in the West Bank, but also within Israel proper and in Gaza. Gaza being under blockade and being under siege is also part and parcel of that isolation, segregation, and fragmentation policy. So I think what's happening in Hebron is interesting because, people are not only segregated among themselves in Hebron, they're also segregated from the rest of Palestine. I rarely go to Hebron. Why? Because it takes me, from Jerusalem, it takes me 2.5 hours. Someone from Ramallah, it will take them 4 hours because they have to go through all of these, roads, the segregated roads, the surrounding roads that have to go all over the West Bank just to reach another city that's actually not that far, but because of checkpoints and the infrastructure that the occupation has created, this makes basically a life and encounter between Palestinian people almost, now today, very difficult, if not impossible. Like, for example, going to Gaza for us is now impossible. So I think it's very important to remind that because, we tend to kind of, I think, zoom in instead of thinking that Hebron is really, alongside Gaza, etc. is Israel has created this sophisticated and bureaucratized system to maintain people segregated from each other and away from each other. And I think this is not new. I think the main conclusion that we're reaching today, not only by going beyond the occupation framework and recognizing that there is an apartheid system all over the territory, Israel and occupied territory, is that at the core of this is impunity. The situation that Mr. Sharabati described has been going on for not only 50 plus years, but 74 years, because a lot of the people in Hebron were already displaced from their cities, lost, and where they had to fled from in 1948. And we're here today, and unfortunately, I just received the other day the other letter that was sent by the Palestinian mission to the Security Council, and it starts by saying, this follows our 750 letters. I mean, I think it's just beyond absurd that we have to kind of send letters after letters all these years, and this impunity and lack of consequences and accountability continues. Violations of international law, violations of fundamental rights, collective rights, and individual rights of Palestinians will continue, and Israel will be continuing its policies in Hebron, whether it's facilitating settlers' violence or facilitating further settlement construction all over the territory, without basically any consequences, without any form of being held accountable by member states. And so, I assume there is a lot of member states hearing us today. I think clearly, there is no other options today than to break that cycle of impunity. when Russia is invading Ukraine, it's very clear it's a territorial aggression, it's an illegal occupation, and it's very clear that empty words and condemnations are not enough. There needs to be sanctions, there needs to be consequences, and you are the best place because you're also working in the guardian of international law to be able to take some of those steps. And I think a lot of the time when the reality kicks in, especially that reality in Hebron, then a lot of the people are like, oh, well, it's the death of the two-state solution, settlers have taken over. I think it's the wrong debate to have, it's the wrong framing to have. What is very fundamental is that what we're seeing today is Palestinians are segregated. They're under an extremely violent military occupation and control. They're treated as not only second-class citizens, but non-citizens and lesser than just citizens or human beings. And I think this is what needs to matter in the debate. It's not about abandoning the two-state solution. We can actually have two states at the end of the road. We can have one state. We can have a federal state. I think we need to put at the center the end of impunity. And I think Hebron is where everything is so crystal clear that it can start there. And short of this, I think the situation, we can do another conference, I think in 15 years, and it will be exactly the same. So I think my only message to conclude is really, that accountability, it shouldn't just be a word. Children, women, men, young people have their lives destroyed every single day. I think you saw just a few pictures. You can watch more videos. You can come here if you can. But short of consequences and really sanctions, whether it's banning arms trade or banning trade with those settlements, banning any form of cooperation that benefits this colonial enterprise, things will not change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Abdel Razek. Thank you for presenting us your VR on your project on VR. I think that's very interesting. I think it's very important to always be reminded of the situation on the ground. And I share with you that our discussion here at the UN and elsewhere are often very abstract. And we tend to not fully grasp the human aspect, the human aspects of the situation on the ground. We need to always be reminded to have a connection on how the difficulties, the suffering that is being experienced every day by our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Hebron. And I share your point that the issue for the population in Hebron is segregation, how they are segregated, not just from the rest of the West Bank, but also from the rest of Palestine. So I think your VR project, I think it's very useful. It will be very useful, and I encourage everybody to take a look at it. It can actually help us to have this connection with the people, with the Palestinians on the ground. So let me just continue now with our third panelist, is Mr. Sulaiman Khatib, who will share with us his experience on the impact of the Israeli police on the communities in Area C. Mr. Khatib, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Nasir and Ambassador Mansour. Marhaba. Thank you for having us, and just to look at the time. So my name is Sulaiman Khatib. I'm speaking to you from Ramallah. And I come from a village northeast of Jerusalem called Hizma. So I'm sharing with you a little bit my personal experience more, since my colleagues talk about the general situation, actually, which I agree. We have to see the bigger policies all over the place, and Hebron is central example of that. My family still live in Hizma, and they have been living there for centuries. So I'm very connected, and my family are very connected to the indigenous culture. And I think also it's really important for me to agree that we talk about sometimes numbers and how many people has been arrested by the occupation or how many land has been taken by the occupation, but it's really important maybe just to mention the human lives behind the stories and the headlines. As I said, I come from a family that also very connected to the Palestinian local culture, like for generations and generations. And definitely my village now actually is really famous with the Hizma checkpoint, unfortunately, because it has been also surrounded by 4 or 5 settlements around my village. The separation wall, where my family personally lost most of our land, has been taken to build the wall, the separation wall around Jerusalem. Of course, like as we spoke about Hebron, it's similar in different ways. The cutting the community relations with the city, with our city, Jerusalem. So this has actually had a lot of impact on our daily life. If we talk about the effect and the impact of the settlers and the settlements and the building the settlements. So there are many sides of that. Part of this also include the cultural part and the heritage and the folklore and the continuation of the community, and even also in the trees. I just give a simple example. In my case, in my family, in the case of my family, like we can see our land and the trees from the window of the kitchen of my family. And this is really, each time we see this, especially for my mom, where she grew up, it's heartbreaking, and it's an ongoing like suffering and painful feeling, especially seeing some settlers enjoying that area. And actually, the effect and the impact is not just on a human. Since the whole world is now talking about the environment, it's actually also on the trees, because we are allowed to do like olive harvest once a year with permits, which is complex also military system. But you know, the trees are dying, like different type of trees, olive trees and almonds and figs. And you know, some of these trees actually from the Roman time, we call them Roman olives. So just to maybe touch the connection that our families, our community has with these trees. It does, I can't speak about our life without speaking about these trees and the animals and the whole and the water system around us. Unfortunately, the colonization policies and the occupation and the settlements, of course, it has a big impact on its war on the indigenous population. So we can speak really for like, because of the time, maybe shortly about the suffering of our population in Area C in the rural areas, from South Hebron Hills to Jordan Valley, around Jerusalem. It's basically, these areas has been abandoned by also the international community, which caused a lot of immigration, also forced immigration to either outside the country or to Area A. And of course, there is also no infrastructure there. So, for example, for the youth specifically, they don't find any work opportunity in this area. So many people move away from there. We are not able even to invest in our own land that we basically inherited from our ancestors, from the Ottomanic era. Like my family personally registered in the Ottomanic records in 15th century. And now it's very hard for us to use this land for any kind of business growth and anything. Of course, I think nowadays with the war against indigenous people around the world, and one big example is Palestine actually, unfortunately we're losing the connection to the nature, and it's very, it has a lot of effect on the traumas and the violence. And so, for example, I live in Ramallah, but when I go to my family, there is army on all the entrances of the village, and also they are not allowed to build outside of Area B, which is inside the village, which is the same case for most of Area C. And outside of the villages, it's Area C that's controlled by the army, and also there's a lot of settlers and settlements around it. Part of these examples also the Palestinian Bedouin communities. We're talking about villages and Bedouin communities. Example is Al-Khalil Ahmar. I was there yesterday for iftar dinner of Ramadan. And this is one example of steadfastness. I want to mention this because this is a strong part of our culture, of a Sumud culture, steadfastness, despite all the challenges that's happening, because we are very strongly connected to the land. Al-Khalil Ahmar example, actually from 1952, the spokesperson of Khalil Ahmar yesterday was explaining to people for how many years they have been there, and the Bedouin indigenous culture that has been also challenged by this occupation reality. And these people themselves actually are refugees from 48, from the south area, like Beersheba area, Beersheba. So it's basically, we'll talk about the Nakba coming soon in May. So this is ongoing Nakba systematically, actually. With that said, I just maybe mention Combatants for Peace, because my friend Avner is here to speak about his experience, because he was very active in our water campaign, which is basically a campaign to provide water for Palestinians in Area C and South Hebron Hills that has no access to their own water. The water resources also controlled by either the army or the settlements. Avner himself was arrested with a few other people. Some people were injured. I think we sent the document to show it now or during Avner talk. It's okay. Of course, this pain and suffering is little compared to the people that lives there daily. We can bring many examples of a school where kids can't really go to school freely every day in Al-Khair, in Susia, Twani, and many other villages that need a company of different activists or their families. So we can imagine the trauma. And so I think we have to be honest and talk about, I'm also, like Inès mentioned, like I don't really spend my energy talking about one state, two state, three state, because I think this committee, with my respectful, is talking about two state. So I want to say, before going to that path, or whatever arrangements will be in the future, we really have to see how much effect of the ongoing occupation on the kids and the environment they live in, the traumas like that inherited over generations. This is not, and you know, honestly, if we want to talk about, you know, most of, I would say many Palestinians, specifically in West Bank, the only Israelis they know is that soldier on their door. And that settler with a weapon. That's, you know, with some Palestinian conversations, because I do have some Israeli friends like Avner, which I'm proud to have allies like that refuse to serve in the army, that refuse the system, to create a life for everybody from the river to the sea, which is also controversial, as you know, not easy. But for some of my friends would say, I never seen an Israeli without uniform. This is how the experience of many of our people going through every day. With that said, I'm like coming from a family and community that feel really the injustices happening there daily in different practices, from arresting kids. Like I just can bring my family as just one example, which is not the worst example, happened every day here. All my nephews were in jail. I myself was 10 years in jail from the age of 14. So we're talking about military regime that basically want to systematically and slowly and different strategies of abusing our rights as a community that belong to this land, and to replace it with new settlers. And I can't see a future for either side, despite the power dynamic here, where we give up our belonging to this place. And from our ancestors, like a teaching of being grounded and connected to the land and the smooth culture that we grew up with, I'm fully optimistic that this injustice has to change, and it will change. And for me, I welcome any efforts that aim to make this change faster. As Inès mentioned, like we don't want to come another 15 years, like to talk about how horrible living under the occupation and to convince people apartheid policies is not human and we have to end that. So I hope there will be more efforts to support the struggle, the Go resistance specifically, even like with our non-violence action. Sometimes like in demonstrations, there is a lot of heavy violence faced by us from the army, including some of the Israelis that join Palestinian in solidarity in different areas. And that shows like us maybe example, if we think of South Africa and Mandela and other experiences, the history, the international community maybe has to support this kind of resistance publicly and clearly, and not staying, like I personally, to be honest, like since I'm 40 years old and since my childhood, I hear of the international institutions, and most of our people has lost hope anyway of that. With my respect to you personally, everybody here, but the system has to change. And as long as we see people like standing in their rights and their, even though it's a long journey, but we know that, I totally believe in change that's gonna happen, and this is similar to different places that happen in the world, like South Africa before the apartheid system end. People were hopelessness and was everywhere. So I believe our revolution has to really carry by visionary people that can see hope beyond these separation walls that will fall at some point. I can ask my aunt, she's 19 years old. She would say the British came 50 years and they left. The Ottoman came 500 years and they left. So we're very rooted to the land here. And I think I will finish here and give the floor to my friend Avner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khatib. I think you highlighted a very important issue that has not been discussed in many when we talk about the issue of Palestine. I think the issue of indigenous culture and traditional knowledge and the loss, the potential loss of these cultures and knowledge, I think it's very important to highlight. Because once it has been lost, it can never be recovered, and the identity of the people will the roots of the identity of the people will be lost. I don't know whether there are any representative of the Palestinian civil society in the current in the permanent forum for indigenous issues that is being conducted right now at the UN. The UNPFII. I think it would be important if you have a representation from the Palestinian civil society or community in these meetings in the future, so that you can continually raise this issue, the importance of indigenous culture, the potential loss of traditional knowledge to the Palestinian people. I think this is very important. And one point that that really touched my heart when your statement was most people have lost hope. I think we should try to I mean, it's all of us has the responsibility to try to bring this hope, keep this hope alive, and I think none more than so than the committee here. So thank you very much, Mr. Khatib, for your presentation and your sharing your personal experiences. I think let me now move to our fourth panelist, Mr. Avner Wishnitzer, who will share his experience on the activism in South Hebron's hills. So you have the floor, Mr. Wishnitzer.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'll later want to share some content, so if it can be, the button can be enabled, that'll be good. So I'm Avner Wishnitzer. I'm a co-founder and longtime activist in the Israeli-Palestinian movement Combatants for Peace. That consists of people, or was founded by people who have been involved in the violence, in the conflict, and decided to put guns away. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the situation in the rural communities in South Hebron. But like my friend Sulaiman, I will not do it in the abstract or by using graphs and data, but as I came to know the area. So what I'm going to share with you is more of an activist account. But it is an account of an Israeli activist, one who sees the occupation not only as oppressive to the Palestinians, but also as dangerous to Israel. That is why I am an activist to begin with, and that is why I'm here today with you here. So it was in the hills south of Hebron that I first came face to face with what had been until then a rather vague concept to me, namely the occupation. It was back in 2002, January 2002, and I joined the activist group Tayush, which is still active in that area today. There were maybe 300 of us altogether, and we set out to bring blankets to Palestinians who had been evicted from their home in the Mesafer Yatta area. I cannot share content for some reason. If that can be solved, I'll be grateful. These people have been evicted, their homes have been demolished, and they were left exposed to the cold of winter, whole families with children and all. So we set out to bring them blankets. The settlers from the nearby Jewish settlement of Susia blocked the main road, and the army stopped us from advancing. And so we walked for several kilometers, blankets in hand, bypassing the blockage before finally reaching the Palestinians who had been waiting for us. It's been 20 years, but I still remember that day vividly. And why is that? Why is that I remember it so vividly? I think it was the first time I witnessed firsthand how force is used in the occupied territories. Previously, I thought of violence mostly in terms of intense physical confrontations, of sudden outbursts of shots fired and people running. The activity in the South Hebron Hills that winter day and the ones that followed exposed me to what is sometimes called slow violence. That is the violence applied by states, my state in this case, against people who were subject to it rather than citizens in it. Slow violence works in insidious ways, through checkpoints and electronic cards, face recognition, through the denial of basic freedom, through zoning, land appropriation, house demolition, and much, much more. This violence, I came to realize, permitted every single aspect of Palestinian life in ways that I could not have imagined before. From marriage choices to drinking water, from children's games to children's arrests, from dreams to traumas. Why did I not see it before? Well, it was exactly because the violence of the occupation is for the most part slow and therefore insipid. It is routine rather than news. It is banal, even boring. It depends on no particular person or institution. It is generalized, faceless. It is backed by laws that apply only to Palestinians, of course, enforced by the military and the police and supported by courts, military courts, but to the Israeli public, courts anyway. So it looks legitimate. Most Israelis, I guess, don't see it as oppression. They see it as order. It is when this order is challenged that brute force is revealed. It is then that violence accelerates and intensifies, often becoming deadly. So let me just start. So one of our main goals in Combatants for Peace is to expose and resist the underlying discriminatory assumptions on which the system rests, to demonstrate its evils, and most importantly, to embody an alternative, an egalitarian, democratic, compassionate alternative, one that is based on a firm belief that ultimately occupiers and occupied, we are all humans. We need to see that and be reminded of that precisely in order to dismantle the structures that allow some humans to dominate others. I'd like to take the remaining time to talk about the limitation of access to water in the South Hebron Hills as a form of slow violence, and explain how we try to challenge it in our Thirst for Life campaign. So this is the map of the West Bank, and we are talking mostly here on this area south of Hebron. So one of the most pressing difficulties in the rural communities in this area is the extremely limited access to water, and this in one of the most arid areas of the West Bank. Information on the water issue in this area is available in multiple reports by Israeli and international and Palestinian organizations, including most recently the UN. And so I will not elaborate, with data. But in a nutshell, Israel does not allow many of the communities in the areas to be connected to the water grid, and the people are forced to buy water from towns like Yatta and transport it in tankers. These are often confiscated under different pretexts. Under these conditions, the costs of water can be 6 times higher than national price per cubic meter in Area C. And I'm quoting here from the UN report from September 2021. In some Palestinian communities in Area C, water can make up to 15% of household expenses. In addition, access to existing rainwater cisterns is limited or denied by the military or by Jewish settlers who enjoy army protection. Settlers also take over natural springs and deny Palestinians access to them. If Palestinians try to build new cisterns, these are often demolished because they lack permits, but permits are almost impossible to get. The communities living under these conditions experience an almost constant water scarcity. While the World Health Organization recommends 100 liters per day per person, in the most arid parts of Area C, the South Hebron Hills included, daily per capita consumption can be as low as 25 liters per day, based on the same UN report. While Palestinians in rural communities in the area experience extreme water scarcity, Jewish settlements, including ones that are illegal even by Israeli definitions, are connected to the grid and enjoy ample amounts of water. These two communities that you see on the screen here are a few kilometers away. The denial of access to water and the dispossession of local population violates not only international law, but the most basic human values. A constant shortage of water prevents many communities, especially in the South Hebron Hills and the Jordan Valley, from developing economic resilience and exacerbates poverty and despair. The situation is only getting worse as the climate crisis deepens. Last September, we launched our campaign aiming to draw attention to the water issue to stand with the communities and to pressure Israeli authorities to secure free access to water to all Palestinians in Area C, including the South Hebron Hills. We launched several direct action on the ground with local organizers, and they are the true, the most important people here in this story and in these activities. We come and go, and they stay there and face all the difficulties, and still they struggle on. So in collaboration with them, we launched a few activities. We brought diplomats to the area. We did advocacy work in the Israeli and international media. The struggle goes on, and the situation on the ground is dire. We are now at the beginning of the dry season, and once the cisterns dry out, local communities will again have to do with very little water. This thirst, too, is the result of the slow violence of the occupation. This slowness makes the situation easier to accept from the outside. But, and this is my last sentence, we should not accept it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wishnitzer, for your personal account and first-hand experience in the situation in Hebron. I really also appreciate your report on the issue of access of water for the Palestinian communities living in South Hebron. And we share your view that I think it should be a matter to be continuously taken up by the international community. It further highlights the oppression that is given put on the Palestinian people. It's when you think about it, when you're already limited resources, 15% of your already limited resources are spent just to have access to water. It's very, very difficult for the Palestinian people, the Palestinian community there. So I think that is the last of our panelists. It brings the conclusion of the presentations. I thank all the speakers for their insightful comments, their presentation, and their personal perspective. I think they have raised many important points and issues, and some are issues that we rarely hear in the international community. So I think it's very important to continue to maintain for us here to continue to address this issue and highlight this issue. I'm really also very impressed by the commitments that is shown by all the panelists to achieving justice in Palestine. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, I would like now to open the floor for comments and questions, first by the committee members and observers, and from the audience, if there are any. So let me just, the approach that we should take, I will be taking is I'll gather a few questions and comments before giving the floor to the speakers. Are there any members, delegations that are willing to take the floor, wishing to take the floor? Elio?
Not at this stage.
I'm not hearing anybody.
Yes, I don't hear anybody wishing to take the floor. We still have time. If the panelist wants to add anything while we wait, or maybe Minister Mansour would like to add anything.
Thank you, Ambassador Nasir, and maybe just to encourage my colleagues, other ambassadors, members of the committee and others to engage with the four panelists which they shared with us amazing stories about, the life of the Palestinian, this very oppressive military, illegal Israeli occupation. And they shared with us, very moving personal stories. And of course, I know personally some of them. I know their families. I know their towns and villages. I know Hizma. I know Al-Khatib family. I've been in Hizma. I promised to go again, and visit Hizma. And I have many friends from Hizma. I attended the wedding, showing the connection between the families there with the land, with the tradition in which Al-Aris was riding on a horse, and men, following with our traditional outfits, and the women with our fabulous, good-looking, embroidered outfits. These things are so intertwined in our being and in our upbringing, and the stories that our grandparents and grandmothers and our ancestors used to teach us. And, we grow with them with so much affection, even walking in the valleys and in the mountains and the hills barefoot, from touching the land, touching the vegetations and the stone. We can tell what each plant is and what is the purpose of that plant. It's a fabulous, moving part of our culture, that this occupation and the separation and restrictions and the checkpoints are efforts by the occupying power to deny our younger generations from learning what we learned as we were growing up. And of course, I understand the sentiment that was transmitted of the frustration, and I add to it also the anger of our, justly so, from the prolongation of this occupation and the time since the Nakba, which the Palestinian people endured. And while we appreciate, all of us, the support of the international community reflected in these resolutions and the overwhelming support to these resolutions covering all of the details of the rights of the Palestinians. But yet, I am running out of logic and explanation, try to convince the people to be a bit more patient. But they're telling me, and correctly so, that they're almost running out of patience. Now, how long, they ask me, should we wait to see justice being brought to the Palestinians? How long do we have to see these crimes committed by the instruments of the occupation without impunity, without justice, without holding those who are committing, these crimes to face, justice and to serve with the punishment that they deserve, with the purpose of deterring them and stopping them? Of course, all these things that you bring to the table is for us, mission of the State of Palestine to the UN, we try to be as faithful as we can in this environment here at the UN, to tell the story of our people and the pain. And we know that, that there was a reference to these 700, close to 800 letters, which we document the crimes of the Israeli occupation. This is only from almost the year 2000, only the last 20 years. It's not from the beginning of time. And we thought that if we document as much as we can of all these crimes committed by the different instruments of this Israeli occupation and the settlers, and what they are doing to our people in Al-Khalil, in every town and village in the occupied Palestinian territory, that record not only will educate the international community about these crimes, but it could be useful if accountability to be on the table of the system of justice. And therefore, you know, those who are looking for evidence, there are tons of evidence of names, of stories, of details of what is really happening to our people. So these are some of the things that we do, and some of the things in collaboration with the great work of the committee to bring people like you, tell parts and stories of our people and their pain, and to contribute to the total struggle of the Palestinian attainment of our national rights. I understand what you're saying. I feel it. Evokes in me all kinds of feelings, like the feelings that you are going through when you tell these stories. But we should not give up. We should not say that it cannot be done. It will be done. It has to be done. They are not the people that can give up. Our grandparents and parents told us tons of stories of remarkable things and difficulties that we were able to overcome. And the old lady, I think your aunt, Mr. Khatib, that told you we saw so many people that came to this land and went. Of course, you know, we want occupation to end. We want the misery against our people to end. We were so remarkable that although we felt that it was unjust for people from outside to come and take our land and to take our nation, but yet we were able to transform ourselves to share, whether in the form of two-state solution, which is a solution that there is global consensus on it, and it is our interest to defend it, because we will not give the occupation a gift by abandoning its isolation, in which the entire international community is saying unanimously that this occupation has to end. Mr. Nasir started his statement, opening statement, by saying that this occupation has to end. The settlements are illegal. There is a global consensus on it. These are tools in our hand to keep this occupation isolated, maximize the pressure in it, and hopefully until we succeed. The environment in the future will evolve into all of us living an equality with full rights to everyone, without discrimination, without apartheid, without one occupying the other one, and to live in one state. If that condition to emerge in the future, and that future will dictate its course in what kind of political system will exist in the land between the river and the sea, which is historic Palestine. But I agree with the sentiment that some of you reflected. It's a common sense sentiment. Let's not waste a lot of time debating this issue. Let us concentrate on each and every one of us in their own place to do what needs to be done in advancing the cause of justice for the Palestinians. And let us not tell each other than our stories, but it is our duty to devote all the time and the energy that we can in order to advance the cause of justice for the Palestinian people. And when we do that, and we are doing that, we complement each other. One day, like Nelson Mandela said, I believe it is not done until it is done. And it will eventually happen. I hope it happens during my time. This is what I used to joke with my father and with my relatives. It was not done at your time. We will do it in our time. Perhaps it's under you, the young ones, under your time and others, but it will, I am sure it will happen. And you have to believe that way, because it will give you strength to continue the struggle for this justice. If I don't have this conviction, I will not be able to fight with all of my might for the just cause of the Palestinian people that they want. I need to believe that way to inspire me, to give me strength and my team in order to do the right thing on the basis of what you shared with us and what millions of Palestinians share with us all the time. this is Mr. Chairman, you know, I'm just trying to help my other colleagues get into the discussion. Again, we are so grateful for being with us. Advise us as to who are the other ones that we should invite that can allow us to tackle another dimension, the reality of the Palestinian. Tell the story and the narrative of Palestinian people. This march, freedom, dignity, and justice. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my contribution to help you, you know, to try to encourage other colleagues to step up to the plate, or maybe the audience who are listening to us to engage thoroughly with the four panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mansour. I think that was very inspiring, and I fully agree with what you have. I fully subscribe to what you have said, that we need to keep the conviction, and we must all do what we can do to help achieve our ultimate goal, which is to free the Palestinian people. And I think your inspiration has given inspiration to many people now to take the floor. I have from South Africa, Mr. Ray Shitole. You have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair, Your Excellency, Ambassador Nasir, Permanent Representative of Indonesia, and Vice Chair of our committee, the UN Committee, the UN Palestinian Rights Committee. Thank you for convening this meeting. We also would like to thank the entire Bureau, the entire leadership of this committee for the stewardship of this committee. Your Excellency, Ambassador Mansour, we also thank you very much for your introduction and your briefing as well. To the panelists, we thank you for your tireless activism, your insightful statements, your sharing of lived experiences, personal, family, of community, as well as the entire occupied Palestinian territory. I don't have a question or comment, just brief remarks to indicate that South Africa is unwavering in its solidarity and support with the Palestinian cause against the Israeli occupation, because, of course, it is universally known that this occupation is an act that is in violation of international human rights as well as international humanitarian law. And it's a violation that is already, worked against the resolution of the United Nations, both the Security Council as well as the General Assembly. And we wish to indicate that South Africa is committed to being part of the international efforts that are aimed at reviving the much-needed political process that will lead to the establishment of a viable Palestinian state, existing side by side in peace, with the occupying power, Israel, within internationally recognized borders that include sovereign equality between the two states. Just a final remark, I think this solution that we envisage as South Africa, envisaged by the UN resolution, is that all people on both sides of the Green Line, Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, must be able to live under a condition free from racism, discrimination of any kind, and free from violence. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shitole, for your comments. Now, let me just, there are a number of questions from the viewers. I have a first one from Mr. David Wiltman, NGO, an NGO from Israel-Palestine Working Group. Let me just read his comments and his questions. I have visited Hebron several times and seen the horrible conditions and violence imposed on the Palestinians there. One of the imperatives of the UN is providing international protection, yet years of impunity have allowed the violence to continue unchecked. What would the panelists on the ground recommend as most important actions by the UN and the international community to end impunity and provide some measures of the international protection for the Palestinian rights? That is his first question. He also has a second question that would be, there are several NGO, non-profit groups in the US and Europe that makes tax deductible donations to support the illegal settlement. How can we challenge and stop this flow of funding that supports the settlement and their violence? I think those are two questions from Mr. David Wiltman. Again, he's an NGO from the Israel-Palestine Working Group. Secondly, I have also a question. The second question, another question from Angela Godfrey Goldstein from Jerusalem. Some of the Hebron settlers, for example, in Itamar Ben Gvir and Bos Marzel and Benzi Gustin, are Kahanis with track records of major violence in H2 and Hebron, and or in death threats to the late PM Yitzhak Rabin. Do anyone in the panel have experience of those settlers? So those are two questions that I have. There is also a question from Nadia Ghanam from the Permanent Observer Mission of the State of Palestine. Her question starts with, thank you so much for such an incredible and informative presentation of the panel. As a Palestinian American, what would you suggest we do to help elevate the injustice, aside from sharing the heartbreaking reality on the ground? These illegal occupation and overt appetite, aside from social media activism of sharing, what can we tangibly do, in our humble opinion, to see the tangible change on the ground? Like you have all said, we must keep hope alive. So I think those are the three questions that was presented to us from the viewers. And then if I can pass this to the panelists, who would like to respond first? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Sharabati.
I need to have the ability to share again, please. Just to share one or two photos, please. But first, I want to say that regarding Palestine and the Palestinian issue, we have dozens of resolutions that have passed through the UN General Assembly or even from the UN Security Council and from subcommittees of the UN with different topics relating the occupation, asking Israel to stop the settlements, asking Israel to respect the holy sites, freedom of movement of the Palestinians, at least within the occupied territories, 1967, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. None of these has been implemented. And here comes the big question. What is the responsibility of the international community with the Israeli refusal and denial, because they even say that these resolutions are irrelevant or that they are against Israel and so on. And we have seen in many cases of occupation before and now that the international community, or what I say usually the international formal community and public community, has taken steps. Like today with what's going on Ukraine, there are many sanctions that are imposed on the Russians. And we have not seen any sanctions imposed on Israel. In the early 90s, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, there was an international coalition that has been formed Iraq was formed out of Iraq. They have faced international sanctions and so on. And this was what makes Palestinians actually so much frustrated and so much losing hope of in their daily life, and because they don't feel that the international community is really serious in implementing resolutions that they talk about. I want to give a small example. In the South Hebron Hills, with home demolition policy, we have international NGOs that are funded by several European countries. They build a tin house for the families who lost their homes. And these tin homes, they have the logos and the flags of the countries who has donated these tin houses, very poor tin houses. In some of these homes, like we have 5-6 flags of 5-6 European countries. And then the Israelis come simply and knock these down again, And here the people are very worried, and they have sometimes very sarcastic comments about it. Like 6 countries have donated this tin house, and they cannot protect it, although it's their fund, it's their money. It's given to as a gift to a Palestinian family that has lost its residency and its shelter and left homeless again and again and again. Relating the organizations that have the tax deduction position, actually, many of the projects, unfortunately, developed within the West Bank are funded by Zionist European and American organizations, and in which, when we talk about settlements, settlements are all illegal by the international law, which means that those organizations that called charitable organizations and charity organizations are contributing to empowering a system of occupation, but under this occupation, we have, a system of apartheid has been developed. During my presentation, when I showed streets that Palestinians, part of the street is accessible for Palestinians, the other part of the street is only accessible for settlers. If I am engaged in any dispute with a Hebron settler, he will go and to a complete different legal system and so on. And I think by allowing first the countries themselves have responsibility, and this is the third party's commitments within the international humanitarian law, that they should not support the occupation in any means. They should not recognize the occupation. I'm very sorry to say, I'm very sad to say that in Hebron, we have maybe the sample of the most extreme colonial settlers within historic Palestine, including the West Bank. Itamar Ben-Gvir, he is now a parliament member in Israel. He belongs to an Israeli outlawed political movement, or used to be called, it's just called a political movement, and it's called Kach, and he's just belonged to another version of Kach. Kach have been outlawed in 1994 by the State of Israel after one of its members committed what we call the Ibrahimi Mosque massacre. He came into the mosque in Hebron, the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron, with an automatic gun, a big amount of ammunition, sprayed with bullets, Muslim worshippers kneeling to pray, killed 29 of them, wounded 125 others. So Itamar Ben-Gvir, Baruch Marzel, they are the leaders. They live in Hebron. Marzel himself, I've seen him in a British documentary, has a sticker in his room that says, "I've already killed an Arab, and you." So all these, those people are given guns. They are given Israeli security protection, and they are all engaged in crimes against Palestinians. When we talk about what shall we do, the question from the Palestinian American woman, I think each one of us has responsibility from where he is, from where his position is. As human beings, as individuals, Well, I say that if you buy Israeli product or if you buy a settlement product, you are engaged in empowering the occupation and colonial and racist system in Palestine and apartheid system in Palestine. When we have international investments going on in the settlements or even in Israel, the settlements project is not an independent, separate from the State of Israel. The State of Israel, they have a law, the national state law, that says that settlements is a national value. So it's the policy, a formal state of the State of Israel, and the State of Israel, we should different investment and firms should divest from Israel and the settlements, and then the different countries have responsibility to put sanctions on Israel, as Israel is not respecting any of the United Nations different resolutions, whether it is coming from the Security Council or it is coming from the General Assembly. I want just to go here and to go to my last slide in the PowerPoint that I have. I hope the picture is clear. Are you receiving it? The one at the bottom and to the right. If you look at it, there is a blindfolded man, and that blindfolded man, next to him there is a child.
Can you put it on presentation view so you can see it really large?
Yes. This one, the one at the bottom, to the right. You can see it. Now, if you look at the picture, the person who is formally arrested in this picture is the little boy. He is, or when this happened, the boy was 5 years, 9 months old. He was playing in the street next to his house near the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron when an Israeli settler was driving by, and he claimed that this little kid has thrown a little stone that hit the tire of his car. You imagine what damage could a stone thrown by this child cause to the tire of the car of the settler. The settler insisted that the soldiers should arrest the little boy. Now, there was an argument between the mother of the boy, the neighbors, for some time. They called for the father to come. The person who is blindfolded and handcuffed is the father. The soldiers insisted to have the boy within the military jeep to be arrested. So when the father came, they both came into the jeep. The father tried to give his son some feeling of security, some feeling of safety. So he came together with his little son into the military jeep. Of course, there were soldiers sitting surrounding them. Now, the field officer who made the arrest called his superior officer for a permission to blindfold and handcuff the suspect, which is the little boy. The higher officer was like little more objective. He asked to have a photo for the suspect. And when he got the picture of the little boy, the higher officer told the field officer, no, you don't do that because this is a little boy. Of course, I was told the story by the father who was listening to the radio discussion between the field officer and the higher officer. And then the field officer didn't want to waste, it seems, the blindfold and the handcuffs. So he blindfolded and handcuffed the father. Of course, they were moved to this place where they were, where they detained them for some time. And the father went to the child to give him a feeling of safety. Then the child lost this feeling when this happened to his father. Of course, they were transferred later to another detention camp where they were detained for several hours and were released. Tell me which country in the world, which political regime in the world allows detaining such children on such age for such a claim? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sharabati. Are there any other comments from the other panelists regarding the 3 questions that was raised by the viewers?
I can
Yes,
speak.
I wanted to jump in. Okay.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Inès, please.
لا
No,
لا
please.
تفضل.
No, please
Okay.
go ahead.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just briefly touch upon the questions and try and be quite concrete regarding what can be done. I think at the UN level, you know, the Palestine mission is doing what they can. I think about documenting, etc. I think one very concrete thing that the civil society has asked for is the reconvening the special committee on apartheid. I think that's a very concrete thing that can be done. But other than that, we all know that the UN is only the sum of its parts, and that's member states. And I think a lot of the member states, what they can do, and I think it needs, again, to be at the center of any policy, is to realize that normalizing with Israel and continue to have the similar relationship with Israel is what maintains this impunity and the situation we're in today. We cannot detach cooperating with Israel, its ministries, its water technology, its security technology, without understanding that this is part and parcel of the illegal occupation and the apartheid that is maintained against the Palestinian people. So what member states need to do is first to not normalize with the Israeli regime and change this relationship to make sure that they don't buy into this Israeli diplomacy that has been developed on the back of Palestinians to sell cyber surveillance technology, military equipment, or water technology that is basically all based on human rights violations. So that's the very concrete message I wanted to give. With regards to the funding to the settler organizations, this is also, many of these organizations that are obviously working with the state of Israel, they're not fully private. I think they work as proxies, but they also benefit from tax-free status in different countries. So what you can do is either as officials or as civil society is verify if these organizations are benefiting from your taxpayer money in fundraising in your country, and try and work against this tax-free status. And I think this should be also addressed. The other thing that exists is individual sanctions. I think this is very used against Russian officials or any officials that are committing war crimes or human rights violations. It's called the Magnity Act in the US, but in other countries it exists. These should be taken first and foremost against settlers, primarily people who are very evidently committing war crimes and participating to human rights violations should not be able to have assets outside or travel freely. There should also be individual sanctions against these people. I think I'll stop there.
Inès, Mr. Khatib, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Nasser. And I want to thank Mr. Mansour for his heart, really. It's not easy for me to give a compliment to diplomats, but really, Mr. Mansour, really loved by many of us here, really, we're proud of you. Just want you to know. And I'm thank you for also giving Nasser for the indigenous rights, the indigenous culture and heritage culture. I think this is I know I'm part of a Palestinian group from historical Palestine. More than 50 people are trying to reconnect with indigenous culture in different aspects. It's not all about the Israelis. There is parts also that about our own culture and in different aspects. There's no time now to talk about it. But I'm personally very connected to that, and my family, and I wish to see more efforts in that direction, actually. I also want to emphasize the optimism that we're talking about. It's really not coming from nowhere, rather from, and for me personally, this was my guidance always. Actually, in Combatants for Peace, Avner might laugh now, I'm always the optimistic person. Avner usually is in between, what we call in Arabic al-mutasha'il, in between. And I grew up with this culture actually, from even the hardest days.
This optimist, al-mutasha'il.
Al-mutasha'il, right. Avner speaks Arabic, he knows what I'm saying. So yeah, you know, like we grew up with songs like, if, you know, they can jail our bodies, they can jail our soul, and this kind of culture in my generation. So I think it's really important while we struggle against the system for system change and generally, we have really to try to create alternative. Maybe Avner touched this briefly. It's a not easy balance to do this. One hand is to struggle against the current unjust system, and on the other hand is to try to create communities that will show model of living differently, freely. Because, you know, our people most likely born under the occupation, like I would imagine 99%. It's hard to imagine something else of a model of living differently. So I think it's really important to maintain optimism, not just by talks, rather by practicality. I know some of small groups maybe trying to show different models of life, even under the complex conditions that we are. And in that optimism side, even like I did travel personally, like Inès spoke about the settlers, like with the free travels. I actually have example from a few days ago. I tried to open a PayPal thing, even though I don't really like capitalism, and they blocked me. And then I called them. I speak Hebrew from jail, so I called them, and they said, "Oh no, it's not political. We don't work with the Palestinian territory, whatever." So I was telling him, okay, if a settler born in Ma'alia Dumim, not far from my village, open a PayPal account, would you block him? You wouldn't block him. So even this simple example, like of a need, like for like really happens with us, like happens with me too, like last week, and the person that work there is just think that he's, as Avner mentioned, implementing the rules. And this is really maybe something when we talk about keeping the order, the peace, what peace we talk about. There's actually a document. I don't want to make advocacy for combatants for peace now because there is more important thing about that, about like the cause of Palestinians. But there is a documentary called Disturbing the Peace, actually. And the name came because the army arrested a few of our guys, like for Palestinian and for Israeli. That was a funny accident. And we asked the army, why are you arresting them? And they said, because they break the rules, the order. Which rules, which peace? Is the peace, the order of the status quo? And I would say, like, that's maybe something really dangerous that many bodies, many institutions trying to keep the status quo. And this is maybe something I want to highlight because I hear a lot of sometimes international calls to keep the status quo in Jerusalem, the occupied territory, and this and that. I think the status quo really shouldn't be respected, and we have to break the rules. And as I said, I just want to bring example of the change that I'm seeing happening. Actually, I was in a speaking tour for Combatants for Peace like 15 years ago, I believe, and we were told around Philadelphia and some community center, we were told not to use the term occupation. And before Corona, I traveled there with because Combatants for Peace has two sides. We can talk about it on another occasion. So there is Israeli coordinator, Tuli. So we traveled together and we spoke in the same community, like after 15 years. And I have this memory from that place. I came, like many people in the first line, had like Palestinian kufiyya. I was shocked. And then Tuli, his family actually originally from South Africa. And he used the term apartheid, not just the occupation. I was waiting for like a bump in that place to happen, but actually nothing happened. So I really could see a lot of changes happening. With that said, maybe I would hope to see from for the Palestinian diaspora person that spoke. Definitely, as Hisham mentioned, every one of us has responsibility. Every one of us now with the social media era can do something. I wish to see more Palestinian engaging of what we're doing. And for example, just to say, like next month, we are doing a Nakba ceremony together with our Israeli partners, and this is really unusual because the Nakba is a taboo for the Israeli education system and for the system. This is something really important to have Israelis recognizing the Nakba and showing solidarity with us in that day. And the last thing I would say, maybe for more the civil society organizations, I would like to see more. I don't believe any organization is gonna make change alone. And this is the lesson from Mandela, from other examples in history. And I wish to see more coordinations in different organizations that using different strategy rather than competing and all of that. So this is really my wish. And again, I maybe speak emotional about this, but I would just want to say this is very emotional for me. It's really nothing about statistics. So I'm happy that people like Hisham is doing statistics and maps. Thank you, Hisham, really.
Thank you, Mr. Khatib. I don't know whether Mr. Wishnitzer would like to comment on the questions or have any other comments.
Thank you. No, I have nothing more to add, just to thank you all for being here and listening. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me just give the floor. I think there was one request from the floor from Ambassador Feda from the mission of Tourist Mission from Palestine. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Nasir, and thank you for chairing this important gathering, and appreciation to the committee and of all its members and observers and the Division for Palestinian Rights for their long-standing support and solidarity to the Palestinian people. I just wanted to quickly at the end join Minister Mansour in expressing appreciation to the distinguished panelists, to Sayyid Hisham, Inès, Sulaiman and Avner. The first three represent multiple Palestinian generations, and Avner represents an Israeli voice that is unfortunately not often heard amidst the loud voices of official Israeli representatives and extremists that are receive much more media coverage. But all of your messages were so compelling and painful, and really help to inform and rectify a lot of prominent misperceptions, and again, that are often peddled even at the UN, as we heard just recently in the Security Council. But also your messages were inspiring because you shared with us something very important, and that's hope. And you have done this despite all that you have witnessed and experienced and personally endured. And I think that we all agree that that hope is really vital as this illegal colonial occupation and apartheid regime, through its perpetration of slow and insidious violence, which was referred to, and its relentless crimes, tries to deflate our hopes and obstruct our efforts for justice and essentially make us give up. And so, as Minister Mansour stressed, and we need to remind ourselves every day, and the panelists reminded us of this today for certain, we cannot give up. And regardless of where we are, whether in the diplomatic arena, in civil society, on the ground, as global citizens, we have to continue our efforts to end impunity and ensure accountability and continue to work for justice and freedom through all legitimate means, political, legal, popular, casting aside those who wish to sow doubt among us that justice and freedom are inevitable. And so I thank once again all of the panelists for these important reminders today, and thank the committee for standing alongside the people of Palestine across all of these years, giving voice to the plight of our people, advocating for their inalienable rights, and working together towards that inevitability of freedom, justice, and peace. And once again, I thank you, Chair, and all of the participants today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Feda. I don't see any other requests for the floor or questions from the viewers. So if there are no other questions, and before I close, I would just like to give the floor again to Minister Mansour if he has any further statements that you would like to make?
Thank you, Ambassador. I think that Ambassador Fida, very eloquently, summed up, our here in the mission of the State of Palestine to the UN. But let me just add one additional thing. What we do among the so many other things that we do here as part of the delegation of the State of Palestine to the UN, we do one additional extremely important thing: legislate. We legislate the details of every aspect of the national rights of the Palestinians. I know the frustration and the anger of not implementing these resolutions, but the objective of the occupying authority is for us to give up, for our people to come to the conclusion that there is no value in these resolutions because not being implemented, to accomplish the objective of, like what Avner said, they don't allow us to have water in order to leave. That's the objective. They don't want us to legislate and to fight for our rights, even when they don't allow their implementation, so that we give up in order not to legislate. We will not give up. We will continue legislating until one day the content of these legislations to be implemented. And as you are very tenacious in fighting every day against the occupation, defending the right and shielding that child, 4 years old, and the thousands of examples in every town and village in the occupied Palestinian territory, we have the same tenaciousness like you in defending every sentence and paragraph and content of the details of our national rights until it is. That is important. Otherwise, why are the Israelis and their friends trying to convince other countries not to vote in favor of these resolutions, or to throw them away, or not to come to the UN in the first place? We are like our people. We are all determined to do what we have to do in our place until collectively, all of us with our friends, including those inside Israel, we will reach the tipping point of accomplishing the national rights of the Palestinians. I think so that the aspect of legislation may be for those who are not engaging in it, they might not see the power of it and the importance of it. But that is a key component of what we do, along with all of the other things that we do in our daily life, representing in the best possible way we can the noble cause of our people, to be like our people who are steadfasting on the ground there, in the Gaza Strip, in East Jerusalem, in all of the West Bank, and even the Palestinians and their friends who are citizens of the state. Legislation is important in this parliament of the whole world. We are key players because our people cannot be ignored, and that we will continue doing it while we understand the frustration, the anger of our people when they say, how long do we have to keep waiting? We need the implementation. I understand that. I hear that. But nevertheless, continuing to legislate is another important tool in our hands in our fight and struggle for the rights of the Palestinians. Again, thank you so much. You taught us a lot. We learned a lot from you. And there is no limit to learning. Every day, we are learning from our people and their friends as we try to share with you what we do in this place. But you are our teachers because you are standing on the land and fighting for our prisoners. And our sumud is you and people like you. And that is what gives us power to continue doing our work in the best possible. Thank you, Ambassador Nasir.
Thank you, Minister Mansour. So I think we have come to the end of our virtual event for today. I would just like to thank all of you, all the panelists, for their very personal and enriching and very enlightening presentation. I would also like to thank all the participants today, and thank you for those who have been following us on social media. Thank you your accounts and have highlighted the threat posed by the Israeli settlement on the Palestinian rights. Today, there was a lot of reference about the situation, the conditions of the Palestinian people, in particular in Hebron, and its association and its likeness with the situation with the apartheid regime that we have saw in the past. So let me just close with a quote from Desmond Tutu, the late Desmond Tutu, who has been, was a very strong fighter against apartheid. He quoted that he stated that the hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness, and I think this is very relevant for today. I see that the light today is there, the conviction, the commitment of all the panelists, of Minister Mansour, Ambassador Feda, and people like all of you around the world, not just in Palestine. And it gives me hope, and I'm sure it gives others hope that we will, like Minister Mansour said, that we will prevail at the end. So I think that would be my final statement. And just to also inform all of you that the Secretariat will prepare a summary of all the deliberation that will be posted in the committee's website and disseminated via social media. You can follow the committee's Twitter, join our mailing list, and visit the UN information system on the question of Palestine, or UNISPAL website, which is the www.un.org/UNISPAL. So this will allow you to stay up to date with the committee's activities and receive the committee's newsletter. So with that, and my final comment is to also just to thank the committee's secretariat and the technicians that have done very well in helping us conduct this event. So we look forward to your ongoing engagement and welcome you in the future activities of the committee. So thank you very much, and I wish all of you a good afternoon, good evening for those who are in the Middle East and elsewhere. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye. Ma'as salama.